Well, today we are leaving Galilee. After a few days exploring the northern part of the country, we start heading south along the Jordan Valley. Before we leave, we're going to stop at the baptism site at the outlet of the River Jordan from the Sea of Galilee. Then we'll proceed south for about half an hour and we'll get to the entrance of the plains of Armageddon to visit the most important location, second only to Jerusalem when it comes to archaeology, and that will be the town of Beit Shean Scythopolis. After dedicating some time to explore the site, we're going to go deeper into the plains of Jezreel, Armageddon, to the spring of Harod. We'll speak about Gideon the judge leading his 10,000 people down to the spring to choose 300 of them to go and do battle. And then we'll come back to the Jordan Valley and head all the way down to the Jericho area, right to the northern shores of the Dead Sea, very close to them, to see the baptism site and the point of the crossing, where the Israelites crossed under Joshua the River Jordan to take the land. And then we're going to have a steep climb to go up to Jerusalem, just like the pilgrims used to do in the days of the temple. And boy, that's a climb. We're going to drive through the Judean desert on our way to Jerusalem.
We're standing right over the Jordan River, where it comes out of the Sea of Galilee. This location was actually made up to make baptism comfortable for you all. I know that not all of you are baptizing again, and once in a lifetime is good for you, but this is the Jordan River. This is the place where it's the most meaningful. And what we do here is usually reconfirmation of your baptism when you come on a tour. And on a normal day, this place is crowded as it can be, with groups over groups over groups who are all baptizing. And we hope that very soon you'll be here again and you will have an opportunity to be baptized yourself in the Jordan River.
Leaving the Sea of Galilee behind, we're heading south. And we're driving along the lower Jordan Valley. The section is between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. And within about half an hour, we'll get to a gap in the mountains, which is the entrance of the plains of Armageddon. And for that reason, the most strategic town was located, and that to be the town of Beit Shean Scythopolis. Let me remind you of a very important principle that goes back to the ancient days. Location, location, location. Sometimes when you want to understand why a site is so big and why so much attention was given to it, you need to consider where was the location. In the old days, where knowledge was limited, you need to look for the combination of roads and water. We are standing now at the eastern entrance into the plains of Armageddon. The main trade route of the ancient world was going right through here, going from Egypt down south to Mesopotamia up north. So naturally, a city will be built here in order to enjoy the trade, to guard the entrance to the kingdom.
They would fit it with burning material.
Engineer tells us that before the Romans decided to build a new town, they will send a team to live.
Okay, folks, you hear me? You hear that? Can you hear me as well? That was just a teaser, just a little bit of whatever. This is not the plan, but the plan is me giving the presentation. So just to give an idea about how the virtual tour looks like, 8 episodes, all right? This is day number 4, just by chance, which I'm not presenting to you. That's it. We're not totally happy with some little things that you want to adjust, like subtitles, for example, because the audio is not that great. But we are learning. We just done that 2 weeks ago. It took us a whole year. In COVID days, nothing was easy. But we're happy with the outcomes, and I hope that you'll be happy too. If anybody's interested in purchasing the whole thing, please check with me. It's a little more complicated. We need your email address, we'll send you a code, then you can go to the website and you have access with the code. All right, you cannot download it. I try to protect it, obviously. So if anybody's interested, not cheap, right? $150, but you do have 8 hours of day-by-day tour in the country.
So this is only downtown Beichan.
If that's what you're interested in doing, just an example of how the whole thing looks like. It's
Drainage of town
Gideon.
missing on the other side.
It's a bathroom.
And apparently somebody who needed a nice kitchen counter probably stole one of the toilet seats and took it away.
Looks like they had some lockers as well, so maybe it was a whole procedure. If you carry something with you, you can deposit it.
Very festive.
Galilee Academy, basically.
In the theater, the first row of seats goes all the way down. He approaches him and tells him that you are going to be the one. Have I not sent you? Gideon wants to see some miracles to be absolutely convinced that he's the man for the job. And after he was convinced, he's sending messengers to the local tribes.
On the enemy, just before the...
Comes all the way from behind me, from the north,
Look how nice
the Sea of Galilee.
ascent
For the
up to
covenant to the whole, Joshua will lead them to 7 years.
Walk. This is the Israeli wilderness. This is the biblical wilderness one should look for. And this is the place where Jesus was taken out by the devil to be tempted for 40 days and nights over Jericho. This is the journey that the pilgrims would have made, and that's where they would sing the Psalms of Ascent, ascending up to Jerusalem.
You look around you and you chant Psalms 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Look at that. Climbing up from Jericho, that's what you see. It was a literal translation into beautiful lyrics in Hebrew to what they've experienced.
The Hebrew version of it is much better than the English one.
Well, you know, you lose some in the translation.
Yeah.
But this is a very high Hebrew that we always have so much pleasure.
And the pilgrims could not have seen Jerusalem from here, but once they got to the hilltop, this is exactly what they saw, Temple Mount.
So you're climbing in faith. You literally have to climb in faith because you do not see the destination of your pilgrimage.
And you're spiritually lifted when you get to the top.
And tired.
And tired.
Okay, guys, it's 2 o'clock, so we're going back to the reason why we're here. Thank you for coming back and staying, please.
Some people have asked about the books. At 4 o'clock, Linda will be back at the table to take orders. And if you have a credit card, she has access to the credit card machine. So just wanted to let you know that. Thank you. Hey, Ronny.
Thank you, folks, and thank you for coming back. This is the toughest time of the day, wouldn't you agree? After lunch. When I used to go and speak in conferences, they always gave me the slot right after lunch. I was kind of an outsider, so what does he know? Usually I can get their attention because my topic was not something that you usually hear in church conferences, so that wasn't that bad. Well, after preparing you and after kind of build up the whole story, finally we'll make it to Jerusalem. And in our days, day number 6 of the tour, but day 1 in Jerusalem. And when you get to Jerusalem, you really want to go into details. So far, we spoke generally about different parts of the country. Jerusalem is important, obviously. Every little detail will help to understand the big story. And as long as the history is, once you understand some basic observations about the city, it will be easy to connect everything to some basic observations. Location is one of them, but not the only one. The way that we organize the days are just random. Here's a list of must-see in Jerusalem. We just divided them in a certain way. So day 1 in Jerusalem in our tour, we're going to cover 3 days in Jerusalem, will take us from the Mount of Olives. We're going to walk down the Palm Sunday road to the Garden of Gethsemane, stopping at the place where Jesus wept over Jerusalem in Gospel of Luke 19, 41 to 44. Then we're going to go into the Old City. In a way, we're going to follow the way of the cross, all right? The way of the cross, and we'll try to point at some dilemmas. Where exactly was it? And if you wonder how come we don't know beyond any doubt, the reason is simple. The Bible doesn't tell us to which direction Jesus went with the cross after the trial in front of Pontius Pilate, right? The Bible doesn't tell us, which means in order to try to find a place to point at, to say this could be the place for the crucifixion and the tomb and the resurrection, we need more than what the Gospels are telling us. We need to understand the Jewish idea behind burial, because Joseph of Arimathea was not buried inside the city wall. No way that his tomb was within the city walls. So we need to try to establish where the city was. We need to understand the Roman mindset behind crucifixion. Had to be done in the most public place, which means by the main gate, by the main road, etc., etc. So there's more than one possible location. Maybe the two are connected. I'll try to convince you once I show you some of the maps and some of the information. Then we are going to go through the Jewish quarter. We're going to make our way to the upper room, which is on Mount Zion, and that will conclude day number 1. But speaking about Jerusalem, there will be an introduction. We need to understand topography, we need to understand geography, and I hope that you will enjoy that day of the tour. We'll go for about an hour, break for 10 minutes. You know the routine by now, and then we'll come back. Well, let's start with this. Some of you may recognize the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. That will be the last place that we are going to visit. COVID days, no cars on the streets. The country was in lockdown, a perfect time to do filming without being arrested. The doors of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the first time in 800 years that they were closed. The first time in 800 years that the gates remained closed. Damascus Gate, the Eastern Gates. Okay, just a teaser, just to give you a little bit of an idea of the places that we are going to see. And let's start with topography. So many people told me geography is so boring. I disagree, right? Geography, topography is important in order to understand, especially in Jerusalem, the story. Let me show you a picture taken by a German pilot in 1935. And this is a classical example of the landscape around Jerusalem. Number one, this is important to understand, Jerusalem is not situated on top of the mountains. The city is located in a big natural arena surrounded by higher mountains. And you'll hear that from me later on as well. When you go to Psalms 125, verse 2, the Bible reads, "As the mountains round about Jerusalem, so the Lord is all around his people." That will be a very accurate description of Jerusalem's topography back in the days of the temple. Today the city is much bigger. What we call today the old city of Jerusalem, predominantly the biblical part of Jerusalem, covers 1% only from the city's territory. So the city today covers about 30,000 acres, much bigger. We are going to focus today on the biblical part, and day number 8 will be dedicated to the new city. Let's point at some of the key locations in the area. The Kidron Valley is a valley which is bordering on the eastern side of Jerusalem. You know the name from the scriptures. It means a dark place. It is also called the Valley of Jehoshaphat. You go to the book of Joel chapter 3. The Bible says that the Valley of Jehoshaphat will be the judgment place for the nations. Jehoshaphat means God will judge. So that's the name of the valley that is cutting through the mountains of Jerusalem. And then we have the Hinnom Valley. Hinnom means in modern Hebrew hell. And the prophet Jeremiah named the place by that name because in his days King Manasseh and his son Amon were making human sacrifices to the gods of the kings of Judah. Were offering humans to the gods of the Canaanites. Jerusalem was the center of all of that. The prophet called it the burning place, or Hinnom Valley. Gehinnom is the evolution to hell in Hebrew today. And there is the central valley that cuts through the city. I do want to pause here for just a minute because when you look at the blue lines over there, right, the streams or the wadis or the dry riverbeds, it is forming a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It looks like the letter Shin, exactly, okay, the letter Shin, and you see that from this vantage point. Shin is the first letter in one of many names of God in the scriptures. Shaddai, for example. Some of you know what is a mezuzah, a little container which is fastened to the side of the door, which is marking the entrance to a Jewish home, basically. All right? If you go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verses 4 to 9, you find the whole commandment over there. To write the law of God, or the books of Moses, on the doorposts of the Israelites. Number 2, marking the doors with the blood of the Lamb. So the angel of death will pass over the doors of the Israelites. These are the 2 reasons why we have this mezuzah. On the mezuzah, there is the name of God, 3 letters, one of 70 names in the scriptures, Shaddai, and that's how the Shin looks like. All right? So when God says he's going to stamp his name on the mountains of Jerusalem, indeed you see from this vantage point a huge Shin, the name of God, is indeed stamped on the mountains of Jerusalem. So that's why the topography, another reason why it's so important. Let me bring up some other names of places. City of David, where the story begins basically, is right when you see the red arrow. That's where the spring is at. A very small part. And if I'd ask you, how big do you think was David's capital? The mightiest king of Israel had the mighty capital by the name of Jerusalem. How big was the city? Well, you should ask me a question in return. You should ask me, how rich is the spring? Keep in mind, we speak about days before people knew how to collect rainwater, how to build aqueducts. Your town could not grow beyond the annual flow of the local water source. In the case of Jerusalem, the spring of Gihon maybe will sustain a population of 1,500 to 2,000 people at the most. We speak about a small town. So when you think about the mighty Jerusalem under the mighty king, King David, it wasn't the largest town in the country. It was basically the medium size of a village even back then with 2,000 people at the most because of one reason, the local spring will not sustain a larger number of people. But that's where the story begins. It all begins by the spring, obviously. Let's bring up some of the names, Mount Scopus, and you see Mount of Olives, and you see Mount of Corruption. Let me pause here for just a minute. What is called Mount of Corruption down at the bottom over there is right above the city of David. You see the red arrow, all right? They are parallel to one another. Mount of Corruption is higher than the city of David. The Bible tells us when Solomon was king, he married lots of wives, obviously, many concubines, and each one of these wives brought with her to the king's court an image of her God from her native country. And Solomon built temples to these gods on the mountain overlooking the city of David. So no doubt or no wonder why it was called in the Bible the Mount of Abomination, the Mount of Corruption, the Mount of Shame. These names are mentioned in scriptures because that was a center of idol worship. The temple for God was standing on top of Mount Moriah, usually not visited by the masses. They preferred to go to the other temples, and no king dared to touch them. We speak about great kings, Hezekiah and Uzziah. Nobody dared to destroy those temples with images to pagan gods. Question is why? Well, the Bible does give us a reason. Josiah was the one that did. Josiah is the only king in the Bible that the Bible has nothing negative to say about. The Bible criticizes all the 39 kings of Judah and Israel, all of them, except for one, Josiah. What they have in the credit was destroying all those high places, destroying the images, and making Jerusalem the one place of worship, not for too long, because destruction is about to come, but at least for a while. Those temples were no longer visited by the locals. The temple of God was the only one that was worshipped for a short time. Josiah started ruling 640 BC, In his 18th year, the Bible said he started his reform and died 609. So he did not accomplish much, but at least he was credited for destroying the high places that no other king dared to touch. For that reason, this mountain is called the Mount of Corruption. Please look at the arrow, the red arrow once again, and think about two hills that go parallel to each other. On one side will be the Mount of Olives, Mount Scopus, Mount of Corruption. It's one hillside. It's one hilltop, divided to certain peaks. Then the deep Kidron Valley, and on the left-hand side will be another hill, which is called Mount Moriah. So the city of David is the southern slope of a whole mountain range that goes about 1.5 miles to the north. Think about two mountain ranges parallel to one another, one higher than the other, and a deep Kidron brook is cutting in between. All right, so once you understand that, you begin to get a picture, because Mount of Olives is higher than Mount Moriah. So you're coming closer to the city, you can see it, because it is in a big natural arena surrounded by higher mountains. Think about the pilgrims making their way up to Jerusalem. You would assume that such a holy place will be on top of the mountains, visible 360 from every direction. It wasn't. You're climbing in faith, you do not see the destination of your journey, and there was a reason why. I'm taking a sidetrack, but I have to, so please forgive me. The law was given to the Israelites in the desert. The law has 613 commandments in it. 248 you shalt, 365 you shalt not. About 60 of those speak about the tabernacle, the priesthood. When you say holy cow, you mean something biblical, because Numbers 19 speaks about the holy cow or the red heifer. And the Bible speaks about, I kid you not, holy cow is biblical, okay? And therefore the Bible speaks about different practices which are connected somehow to topography. Where will be the altar for the holy cow located in relation to the tabernacle? There's no temple yet. By the way, the whole Torah, the books of Moses, do not mention temple. Not even Jerusalem is mentioned. They speak about a tabernacle. Once God chose the place on top of Mount Moriah, and you want in a way to transfer everything that you got in the desert to a totally different landscape, you need to consider the mountains and the valleys around the city. Otherwise, it won't fit. So you have to understand topography to understand the rituals as well. And the holy cow is a good example. We'll speak about it in the next hour. So once we begin to understand topography, you begin to understand the location as well, and why it's so important to understand the location of those places. I'm zooming in now to the city of David. That's where the story started, basically right here. And you do see that above city of David says Temple Mount. This is a wrong note here, because there was no Temple Mount until the days of King Herod the Great. It's Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah, the only place that God chose, all right, the only place the Bible calls holy is Mount Moriah. And therefore, that will be the place that David was ordered to purchase. It was a threshing floor that was owned by the local Jebusite ruler, Araunah, and Solomon was the one to build temple. So Solomon built a temple according to God's instructions on top of Mount Moriah. That's the chosen location, and the only one the Bible calls holy. I'm taking another sidetrack, if I may. When the Israelites are walking through the desert, God is promising them, I'm going to take you to a good land. I'm going to choose a place for you. That will be the chosen location. It doesn't say what for. It just speaks about choosing a place. When was the place chosen? Nearly 500 years after the days of Joshua. Which means, what were people supposed to do? You understand my point? People came to the land, they want to worship the God who brought them into the good land of Canaan, but his God said, just a minute now, I'll choose a place. What are we supposed to do now? Until you choose the place. For 500 years, the days of the judges, the days of Samuel, the days of Saul, the place was not chosen yet. And for that reason, when the Bible speaks about the Israelites worshiping under every hill, every green tree, the Bible doesn't criticize that. The Bible always will tell us to the days of the judges. They did that because God did not choose the place yet, almost justifying the whole gesture. I understand the Bible says, I'm paraphrasing, that you want to worship the God of Israel. He promised to choose a place. He did not. So go ahead, worship. The problem was not the high places. The problem was the images. The Bible says clearly, no images. But once Jerusalem was chosen, worshiping in other location became to be forbidden. But until then, people wanted to worship God, and they would do that in the hometown, inside the town, on the mountain, outside the town. It doesn't matter. The problem was images, not worshiping on high places. Please understand the difference, because it's critical. But once God told David, that's the place, go and purchase it, all the others, they came to be basically a sin in a way. The focus was supposed to be Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. So that will be Mount Moriah right in front of you in the city of David, the southern slope of Mount Moriah. Here's what we know about Jerusalem from other sources, and just to be very brief. I'm taking you back now to the 19th century BC, and we are in Egypt. There was a certain tradition in the Egyptian army. Before you go to do battle, you write the name of the enemy on clay figurines and you smash it down to the ground. Hopefully, that's what will happen to the enemy in the battlefield. Lo and behold, the whole pile of pieces was found. The name Jerusalem is there, which means that for the Egyptian pharaohs, Jerusalem was important enough to lead the whole campaign into the mountains. Because Jerusalem is on the hills, and we never read about the Egyptian army invading the mountainous area. They stay along the trade routes, which means down in the valleys. And he can also teach us that somebody else took Jerusalem from the Egyptian, because Canaan was always Egyptian territory. So if you need to lead your army to conquer Jerusalem, that means that Jerusalem is important to you. It means that somebody else conquered the city and you want to retake it. So we find in those execration texts, that's the name over there, the name of Jerusalem more than once. That will tell us something about how important the place was. Guys, keep in mind, these are the days of Melchizedek, the days of Abraham, 800 years before the days of David. There was a town over there, well established, with professional diplomats, because if Pharaoh is corresponding with the local ruler, somebody has to know how to read and write to answer. We speak about a well-educated society that occupied the city before the days of David. And then from the 14th century BC, the tablets of El Amarna, the whole archive of the Egyptian Foreign Office from the 14th century BC was found in the town of El Amarna in Egypt. 381 clay tablets, each one is a letter. Pharaoh is writing letters to his vassal kings, including the king of Jerusalem. And the king of Jerusalem responds, and he gives us an amazing document. He says the following: the Habirus, I'll say it carefully, the Habirus are at the gates of the city. Doesn't my Lord care about losing his town? Habirus, Hebrews, close enough? Habirus and Hebrews, close enough, right? Well, not everybody agrees. But is it possible that we have a document that points at the moment that we read about in Judges 1, that the tribe of Judah is approaching Jerusalem, and the king of Jerusalem is writing his master Pharaoh, come to the rescue because the Hebrews are coming? If this is indeed the case, this is an amazing document that we have. We have the letter, breaking news, the Hebrews are coming, send somebody to help. Now, we take it kind of for granted, but this is an amazing document that basically points at the moment that the tribe of Judah is approaching Jerusalem to conquer the city, and the king of the city is sending a letter to Pharaoh. So these are some of the documents that we have about Jerusalem in history. The first time that we read about a city in the scriptures will be indeed in the days of Melchizedek, Abraham. We mentioned him earlier. The town was called Salem, then it was called Jebus, and after David conquered the city, he'll name it Zion, and later on the city of David. So these are 4 or 5 names of the same hillside, right? The same long, narrow hillside of Mount Moriah. Well, the Bible speaks about that as well, and we need to answer a question here. If indeed the tribe of Judah conquered Jerusalem, why did David have to conquer it 400 years later? Was the city conquered or was it not? When you go to Joshua chapter 12, there is a list of 31 cities, all conquered by the tribes of Israel. We know for a fact that not all of them were inhabited by the tribes of Israel. We know Megiddo, we know Beit Shan, we know Jerusalem. So how do we understand that? Let's make a distinction. We speak about a nation of nomads coming out from the desert. It's not easy to change your way of life and to occupy a city. In order to get used to live in a city, you need to change your profession from nomad to farmer. It takes some time. It takes a whole change of mind to limit yourself inside walls. Somebody who is used to wander miles and miles every day, that's not an easy thing to do. So yes, the city was conquered, but for some reason the tribe of Judah decided not to populate Jerusalem. So as they moved on, the locals came back and reconquered the place. So it's not contradicting. It's right to find another example. How come Jerusalem was conquered and David has to reconquer it? Because the Bible tells us that when David killed Goliath, he brought his sword to Jerusalem. Now that's a mystery because Jerusalem was not in David's hands yet. Okay? He will conquer it a little later on. So a few things, geographically, we have a challenge to try to understand. How do we to understand it? Is it possible that the tribe of Judah did stay, and only later on the locusts? We don't have the details. As I said many times, the Bible is not interested to tell us history. So we are left with some questions that we cannot really answer when you try to prove that historically, so to speak. What is our route for today? We are going to start at the Mount of Olives. We're going to make our way down into the Kidron Valley. We're going to go through the Pool of Bethesda, you know the name, into the old city of Jerusalem. We'll walk the way of the cross, try to explain what is the way of the cross, or the Via Dolorosa, and then going through the Jewish quarter, we'll finish our day in the upper room at the Tomb of David. Traditional locations. No way that the place called the Tomb of David could be indeed the Tomb of David. No way whatsoever. These are traditions that were developed much later on. So we start standing on top of Mount of Olives.
What an amazing view. Let me start with a verse from the Bible, Psalms 125, verse 2. As the mountains round about Jerusalem, so the Lord is all around his people. And this will be a very accurate description of Jerusalem's geography and topography in the days of King David, in the days of the temple. We are standing now on top of Mount of Olives, and most of the pilgrims that came to Jerusalem from Galilee, from Babylon, from any other corner north to Israel, would usually take the road along the Jordan Valley, would climb from Jericho, and after a steep climb, when you're weary, you're tired, you find yourself standing on the top of Mount of Olives, and down below you, you see the facade of the temple. What an exciting moment that would be. It is true that the city is surrounded by mountains, and therefore you may climb up to Jerusalem, but you have to do that with faith, because you do not see the destination of your pilgrimage. Only when you come to the mountains around Jerusalem, down below you, in a huge natural arena, you see the temple, which means coming from north, or from south, or from east, or from west. Not before you come to the mountains overlooking Jerusalem, you can see the city. And once you set eye on the city for the first time, it's a reason for a celebration. And therefore, not just Jerusalem is holy, but all the mountains around Jerusalem will have something attached to them. Since the Mount of Olives is the closest one to the temple, and most people came indeed from that direction, that's what made the Mount of Olives so important. It was a place of worship before the temple was built on top of Mount Moriah. We are told in 2 Samuel, when David flees from Jerusalem, the Bible tells us from his son Absalom, he's climbing the Mount of Olives where he worshipped God. So that was a high place, a place of worship. The whole mountain was covered by olive groves and not by the graveyard as today. And walking down the hill as Jesus did, you're indeed walking in the shade of the olive trees. We know the place from the scriptures. It is mentioned many times. The prophetic prophecy of Zechariah 14 will speak about the day of the Lord and how God is going to stand on that mountain, and the mountain will be split into two. We do know that the Palm Sunday walk that Jesus took that Sunday started here in a small town called Bethphage, walking down the hillside. That's where he taught the disciples to pray the Lord's Prayer. And since the Bible never tells us that Jesus stayed inside the city overnight, we have to come to the conclusion that most of the intimate time that he spent with the disciples was either in Bethany, only about a mile away from here, or under the olive trees, in caves maybe, on the Mount of Olives. Today it's a graveyard, and we'll speak about the graveyard maybe a little later on, but try to ignore that. If you want to see the city as it was back in biblical days, wasn't as big as you see it in front of you, just focus on the Golden Dome. That's where the temple used to be.
Well, speaking about the graveyard for just a minute, it's the largest Jewish graveyard in the world, more than 150,000 tombs. And what you see in front of you is a section of it, but once again, in the days of Jesus, it was indeed the Mount of Olives. It was covered by olive groves, and there were lots of Gethsemanes. Gethsemane means an olive press. It was an industrious area in which the olive oil that was needed for temple rituals was prepared. So one is very famous because of what were in the Gospels, but it was not the only Gethsemane. So Gethsemane in Aramaic simply means an olive press. When the Romans laid siege around Jerusalem, Josephus tells us, they simply cut off all the trees to have a clear line of fire for the catapults and the ballistras, etc. For that reason, we don't see any other trees. Well, we do have some in the Garden of Gethsemane. A word about the way of burial very quickly. The stone boxes that you see in front of you are not the tombs. All right, this is a tombstone. People are buried in a pit, and the pit is 5 feet deep, but not in a casket. I'm speaking about the Jewish way of burial. They are wrapped in a big blanket, a prayer shawl, a talith, and they are laid down to the graves on their backs, feet facing Mount Moriah. It is our tradition that when the Messiah comes, we still wait for the first coming, you wait for the second coming, obviously. He's going to touch down the Mount of Olives. And on his way down along the Palm Sunday Road, all those that are buried over there will be the first ones to be raised from the dead. So people are paying money, and quite a lot. It's a private cemetery, to be buried in that specific location. I'll wait a few seconds. Won't be buried there. I won't buy any property. It will happen to me a few seconds later, being cynical a little bit. But again, people are willing to do that and to bother to pay the money to be buried on the hillside over there, facing the temple area. So the tomb is a tombstone. The stone blocks are not a tomb itself, and the little pebbles on top are just like flowers. All right? They are cheaper, they last longer. It's a token of respect, of visitation. It's our tradition that every anniversary, the spirit of the deceased physically, literally comes to the tombstone and counts those pebbles to see how many people still remember and how many people come to pay the respect. So when you go to visit, you leave a small stone on top. Some of you might have seen Schindler's List, the movie. And that's how the movie ends. Oskar Schindler is buried in Jerusalem. They show a long line of the people that he basically saved their lives, and they come to show their respect by leaving a small pebble on his tombstone in the Catholic cemetery in Jerusalem. So that will be the cemetery or the graveyard outside the city walls, always outside the residential area. Jewish cemeteries are outside residential area. If something happens and there is a cemetery and the city grows around it, you have to build walls at least 30 feet high, right? Because the way that we understand that dead bones are the ultimate source of contamination. And for that reason, to be careful not to be impure, that's a way to do that. If anybody has seen a Jewish funeral, for example, it's not pleasant to see. The tradition is that when somebody dies, you try to bury him or her in the same night before sunset. All right? Because, forgive me for being gross, but without the spirit in a human being, it's just flesh. Okay? So it's our tradition, which is not pleasant to see. We don't treat the dead body with any respect, just to get rid as quickly as possible, to lay them down in the grave. That's the idea behind it. Without the spirit, again, not very pleasant, but that's the way it is. So it is our tradition until this very day. Walking down the Palm Sunday Road, you hit the Garden of Gethsemane. I need to apologize, but again, COVID days, the place was closed for many days. I think they just reopened not that long ago. And you do see the basilica, a facade of the church, which is built in the Garden of Gethsemane, the bottom of the Mount of Olives. And again, it does have some olive trees in it, which I wish I could have told you from the days of Jesus, most likely not that old. I'm going to show you this picture. But the oldest one in the garden is about 1,200 years old. Olive trees are known for one main thing, which is interesting. When they have those branches, and the branch is kind of bending over and touches the ground, it will run some shoots or roots inside, and basically you speak about the son, all right, or the daughter of the mother tree or the father tree. So let's settle that these are the grandchildren of the olive trees from the days of Jesus, which is a possibility. And you do see a Gethsemane down below you over there. You see the olive press. It's just a replica of something to show you how the whole system used to work. So all that is in the complex of the Garden of Gethsemane. The church, by the way, the basilica, was built by 12 Christian nations that fought against each other during WW1. It was a symbol of reconciliation. And as many other churches, like synagogues, we speak about more than one building on the same location. Layers of buildings one above the other, because once the first church was built, the ground was consecrated, and every new church will be built one above the other. It was holy ground in a way. For that reason, everything is arranged in layers. So this is the one in front of you. By the way, there are two deers on both sides. All right? Those deers were stolen in 2008. So that had to be taken the picture sometime between 2008 to 2020, because in 2020 they didn't find them, but they made new ones. So there are two reindeers on both sides of the cross. All right? In Catholic art, so to speak, the deer are the symbol for the faithful believer. Psalms 42, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul pants for you, O Lord. So those deers are always used to be the symbol for the believer. So now they are there, but for about 12 years they were not. So this is the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives. And along the way, we are also walking by the place where Jesus wept over the city when he prophesied its destruction. It's called the Church of the Teardrop, shaped like a gigantic teardrop. And from the window, you do see, of course, at the Temple Mount right in front of you. As you go down to the Kidron Valley and you cross the Kidron Valley, as you see on the map here, you're climbing up to the Lion Gate. You see the blue arrow over there, and that's where we are right now.
In 1219, the walls of Jerusalem were dismantled by the local Muslim Sultan. And for 300 years, Jerusalem had no defenses. The Ottoman conquest was in 1517, and Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan, decided to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Construction started in 1537 and went on for 5 years. The walls that you see behind me are the walls of the old city of Jerusalem today that were built by the Ottomans in the 16th century. The main gate on the eastern side is what you see behind me. And this gate is known by 2 names, Lion's Gate or Stephen's Gate. It is a tradition that through that gate, Stephen was led down to the Kidron Valley for his martyrdom. And through that gate, in June 7th of 1967, the Israeli paratroopers broke through the walls of Jerusalem to liberate the city. Lion Gate, named after 2 pairs of leopards that you see on both sides of the gate. These are not meant to be here. The 2 leopards were part of the coat of arms of a Mameluke sultan called Baybars, and they were brought here from some part of town to decorate the city walls and the city gates from the 16th century.
You understand, of course, that the 21st century, when you go to Jerusalem to try to visualize how the city used to look like 2,000 years ago, is almost impossible. Everything is buried underground. And for that reason, to tour the city, you have to go underground. You need to go under living quarters, because the other way to do that is simply to clear whole neighborhoods and then start excavating after clearing the area. Despite of what people say about us, we don't do that. But you hear that always. The Jews are ruining the Arab homes, etc. Absolute nonsense. However, there's always a loophole in the system. No law says how deep under your property is still your property. All the way to Australia, right? Or maybe only 30. It doesn't say that. Which means if you go deep enough under the foundations of a building, you can do basically whatever you want. Be careful not to shake the foundation of the building, but nothing can stop you legally because you're not taking anybody's property. What made the excavation in Jerusalem possible is that loophole, because giving one reason why an Arab landlord will give permission to the state to excavate under his home, to prove, if proof is even needed, the Jews lived in Jerusalem long before Islam was even born. So you don't have the locals' cooperation. And in the old city of Jerusalem, most of the population is indeed Arab. So the only way to do that, basically, is go under living quarters and start digging. Or come from the Jewish quarter part, which is much easier, for obvious reasons. So there was a whole subterranean town in Jerusalem which will be accessible. They are digging a few entrances. They open one side after the other. Now they started opening a whole plaza under the Western Wall Prayer Plaza. Amazing, the old streets of Jerusalem from the days of Jesus. And therefore there was a challenge how to build and how to dig and how to find the past, basically, in a city like Jerusalem. Some of what I'm showing you is taken from a scale model of Jerusalem, which is in the museum, specially made to try to clarify things about Jerusalem in the days of Jesus. So if you go back to what I tried to show you, basically, we're going closer now to the city. The Pool of Bethesda will be on the right-hand side. John chapter 5 speaks about what happened by the Pool of Bethesda. And the Bible says it was by the sheep gate. Can you see the little arrow if I'm using that? No? No. Anyhow, as we said, the Antonia fortress, right under it, there was a sheep gate over there. And the Bible says by the Pool of Bethesda was the sheep gate. Through the sheep gate, they used to bring the daily offering into the temple's area. And then there was the fortress. Right, Antonia Fortress, I will use the Latin name for it, Praetorium. You know the name Praetorium. That's where the trial of Jesus took place. When this place was built, it was built by Herod the Great on the northern side of Temple Mount, an excellent commanding post over the temple's courtyard. That would be the hotspot. Whenever something happened in town, it happened in the temple's courtyard. And therefore the Roman governors in years to come, when he wanted to establish himself someplace in the city, to take good control about what happens, he will establish himself in the Antonia Fortress, which made it Praetorium. Every place that the Roman governor will set up his headquarters will be called Praetorium. The name Antonia is named after Mark Antony. all right, Richard Burton, I'm sure that some of you remember, when Herod built the fortress, Mark Antony was his patron. So to honor Mark Antony, he called it the Antonia Fortress. So in Jerusalem, Praetorium was indeed the Antonia Fortress. I'm mentioning all of that because that starts the way of the cross. That starts the way of the cross, so let me just go over the last 24 hours in the ministry of Jesus. It started in the upper room. They had the Passover meal, the Last Supper. They go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is arrested. I have a map in just a minute. They take him to the house of Caiaphas. The following morning, they take him through the busy city. It's Passover. The city is filled with people to Antonia Fortress, to Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate says, well, you're a Galilean. Fortunately, the ruler of Galilee, Herod Antipas, is in town. He should deal with it. They take Jesus to Herod Antipas. Antipas is outsmarting Pontius Pilate, saying, well, I'm out of my jurisdiction. Your problem is the governor. They take Jesus back to Praetorium, and then the trial takes place, and Jesus walks with the cross along what we call today the way of the cross, all the way to Mount Calvary, which leaves the question, where is Mount Calvary? I'll try to answer, all right, but again, just one possibility.
We just left the pool of Bethesda behind us, and we are climbing now deeper into the old city of Jerusalem. At that area, the way of the cross begins. It will take some imagination, but if you can just remove all the structure that you see in front of you, and think about a large, massive courtyard, and this courtyard was a courtyard of a fortress that was called Antonia, named after Mark Antony, built by Herod, and Mark Antony was Herod's master, and therefore to honor his master when he built that fortress, he named it after Mark Antony. But this place was also Praetorium. Praetorium is a generic name in Latin, simply means headquarters. Every place in town that the Roman governor will position his headquarters will be called Praetorium. And what will be more suitable than a mighty fortress, which is overlooking the temple's courtyard, than to be a headquarters? And therefore, Praetorium in Jerusalem is the Antonia Fortress. And they brought Jesus to this location. And that's where the trial of Jesus took place. And he started walking with the cross from that point on his way to Mount Calvary. And therefore, this place is marking the beginning of the way of the cross, or the Via Dolorosa.
Let me try to address that in some details. Number one, the whole concept that pilgrims are following one path called the way of the cross is relatively new. All right? Until the 14th century, there was no such path. We have a lot of information because many pilgrims wrote books about their journey. A pilgrim's diary will be called itinerary. Itinerary means to describe something in a geographical order. None of them is mentioning following a mandatory path. There was a list of must-see. Every site offered indulgences, and you want to collect as many as possible, you go randomly from one location to the other without following a certain path. So the question is, what really created, if you wish, the way of the cross? And let me say only a few words regarding that. After the last Crusader was expelled from Palestine, and that was in 1291, the hatred between the Muslims and the Christians was so high that the last thing the local Muslims wanted to see is Christian pilgrims roaming the streets of Jerusalem once again. But they needed the money, because the pilgrims brought money with them. That was an important part of the economy. So the masses were not maybe happy, but the leaders, they had every interest in the world to encourage Christians to come, but you also tried to maintain law and order. And for that reason, negotiations started between Clement VI, who was the Pope, and the Sultan of Egypt that had Jerusalem and Palestine under his custody. An agreement was made. They signed an agreement in 1335 that for that and that amount of money, it was Venetian ducats, that was the currency of the time, like American dollars today, the Christians will have some rights in Jerusalem. They can have some rights in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, will be there soon, and they need to choose one path, only one path to follow, and that's where they're going to be safe. But they cannot roam freely around the city because the Muslims will be so upset to see Christians once again that nobody will be able to police the city. An agreement was signed. And the Pope called to his officers the head of the Franciscan Fathers' Order. It was the 6th of November 1342, and gave him a mission. He said, you, sir, are going to represent the Christian world vis-a-vis the Muslims, you will be the custodian of Palestine, of Jerusalem. Which means that every pilgrim who is going to come to the country is going to be hosted by the Franciscans, is going to be guided by the Franciscans. You'll buy your souvenirs in their shops, and you're going to dine in their restaurants. I'm not being sarcastic here. It was also a moneymaker. And therefore, to make sure that people are more civilized, so to speak, the agreement said very clearly, Christians can come to Jerusalem, but you choose the path that you want to follow. If we find you off the path, we cannot guarantee your safety or your security. The way of the cross was born. So we speak about the necessity to accommodate Christians in the city. It gave the Franciscans a lot of power, because every pilgrim who came to town heard one story, the Franciscan story. And they had an agenda like everybody else, I'm sorry to say. And therefore, what produced the Via Dolorosa was a deal between the Christian world and the Muslim world, just to allow Christians to come to town to follow one path. You do know that every Catholic church, all of them, will have the way of the cross marked in stations on the walls of the church. 14 stations altogether. And people that thought it's too far to go to Jerusalem, let's commemorate it in our church, would hold those parades, so to speak, instead of coming to Jerusalem, walking inside the church from station to station, imitating, if you wish, the way of the cross. So that's how it started. And today, there was a way of the cross that everybody goes to visit, but historically, 14th century, not prior to that. Question is indeed the red marking over there shows the way of the cross? Well, the question is who you're asking. I would like you to ignore for a minute the wall that goes around, that makes a big loop. Can you all see that? It wasn't there. The map in front of you shows Jerusalem, 66 AD, which means about 30 years after the days of Jesus. Few things were added to the city. The wall that encompasses a large area was not built yet in the days of Jesus. And therefore, we need to look at the inner wall, all right, the one which is a little lower than the main one. As I said, no way that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea was built within the walls of the city. So if this is the wall of reference, and all scholars agree that that's how the wall used to look like, you need to find the main gate, you need to find the main road, and you need to understand it had to be outside the city. And that will lead us to look at two possible locations. Number one is where this red marking ends. Today it's a church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, believed by many to be the place. Inside the building, you have a little hill, there is a tomb over there, because the Bible says, by the crucifixion there was a tomb, right? Please define by. What would qualify to be by? I'm trying to make a point here. 100 yards? Come on, work with me. 200 yards? Am I pushing it? 300 yards? What about 400 yards? You understand what I mean, right? We don't really know. Because what we call the way of the cross, the path that every Catholic pilgrim is going to follow, and out of curiosity many others as well, will be the one that ends in what is today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's outside the wall back then. It's by the main road that went down to Jaffa, a little hill. Possible, and a tomb outside. It's a possibility. Another possibility. The other possibility is now marked in the yellow dots over there. We do know beyond any doubt that the first part of the walk with the cross has to be this one, because you're going down into the central valley and you have to make right or left. Another possibility also outside the walls of Jerusalem, also by the main road, also by a main gate, Damascus Road, is a place called today the Garden Tomb. By the way, the very top of Mount Moriah, because Mount Moriah starts at the city of David, you can recognize, I'm sure, and goes all the way. All right? So, which one is it? One or the other? But if you tell me that 600 yards will qualify to be by, is it possible that the end of the yellow dotted line, that's where the crucifixion takes place, but the tomb of Joseph was in the end of the red line? Because if it is possible, we don't have to choose one for the other. I'm speculating, all right? Opinions. We don't speak about mathematics here. And it's not important. These are matters of faith, matters of the heart. What you believe it is, it is. Nobody has to prove it in any way. When you come to Jerusalem and you see the options, it's confusing. So I do want at least to point at the two possible locations. Is my poor skills of drawing will make some sense when you look at that? Yes, no, maybe? Well, I did my best. If that's not good enough, what can I say? Anyhow, that will be a possibility. And let me challenge you with something else. Is it possible that Praetorium was in Herod's palace and not in the fortress of the Roman governor as we thought? Some scholars do believe that when the Roman governor came to the city, a spoiled man, he would like to enjoy the luxury of Herod's palace, and he would position himself in the palace. If that's the case, we need to choose another way of the cross. It won't choose the place of the Mount Calvary, it's just the way that you're following. So scholars are debating, that's how you make money. You have a theory, you write a book, everybody buys it, and you make a name for yourself. I kid you not, sometimes they're not really based on much, but always catches the attention of people, always some controversy, always a scandal. So here, I read a book that suggests that Mount of Olives is Mount Calvary. Based on what? Well, I really tried to follow some topography. Either the man never visited Jerusalem, which is possible, or just made up a whole thing, but hey, I'm telling you, every opinion is legit. Can I say kosher in the, yeah, well, kosher. Anyhow, here are the stations of the cross, 14 altogether. You can clearly recognize that 9 of those are biblical, but 5 are not. There are 3 stations that mention the falling with the cross. The 3rd, the 6th, the 7th and the 9th. The Bible says nothing about Jesus falling with the cross. But they're marking those over there, where the Catholic parade is walking by, they stop by every station, and they sing some hymns and they read from the scriptures. That would be the routine. And just some of the pictures of how these look like. And again, something that sounds ridiculous, but station number 4, all right? Jesus meets Mary, not in the Bible, was located in a certain building. The owner of the building, a Muslim man, wanted to open a pizza place. So they moved the station to the next building. What can you do? The city lives its life, there's some necessities, some problems, ownership of land, it happens. So the path, that's what matters, and not that much the stations, station after the other, and it all leads to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which will be the holiest place to many Christians in the world. Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Armenians will come to this building celebrating the crucifixion, the tomb, and the resurrection. All right? It's quite an old building. It was dedicated by the Crusaders to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the conquest of Jerusalem, and that was in 15th of July, 1149. The building still stands. So you see inside, it's a building inside the building, over there, right? That will be the tomb itself, which is also covered by the edicula, as they call it. It's all done Russian style. 5 different groups are celebrating inside the church. Everything is divided by a certain plan and program. I have to say that, there's no nice way to say that, but I have to say that, all right? There was a bitter fight among Christian groups in Jerusalem over possessing Christian holy sites. Until about a century ago, Palestine was in the hands of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans were not idiots, they understood they have a treasure in their hands. And once the Christian superpowers wanted to intensify their involvement in Ottoman affairs politically, they used religion as an excuse. Because if you're willing to pay to buy a church in Jerusalem, it may give you some leverage to accomplish something political, but you may collide with all the others. Which means if Russia is interested in one specific structure, so will be France and Britain and Spain and Austro-Hungary, remember? So the Muslims were simply instigating the Christian countries one against the other by manipulating ownership of Christian sites in Jerusalem. Things were so bad that people were killed over these disputes. Now I know it sounds a little ridiculous, but in 1878, after decades or centuries of fighting for these places with bloodshed, now the thing is that if there was an issue in Jerusalem between the Russians and the French, it reflected immediately what happened between the countries in Europe. The Crimean War. Anybody heard about the Crimean War? The biggest war of the 19th century, more than the wars of Napoleon, started over a dispute between Russia and France in the site of the Nativity in Bethlehem. So we need to understand the level of tension, level of sentiments. Everything today is working by status quo. And it's hard for me to show you, but maybe you can see, in just a minute. So the blue arrow, that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I do want just to point at outside the window over there is a ladder leaning against the wall. Can you see that? A simple, stupid, forgive me, wooden ladder. Okay. The ladder is there since 1878. You can't touch it. Because once they did the inventory, who owns what, to write the status quo, somebody forgot to include the ladder. Which means the ladder is not included in the status quo. You can't touch it. Because if you do, you create an international crisis. Now, we can laugh at it, obviously, and we can take the side of, the zeal and the passion and the sentiments. 5 years ago, the Greek Orthodox office of the patriarch. Really what it was the door was open. By the status quo, when the Franciscan procession Friday afternoon goes into the building, the door should be closed. That's the status quo. They are going to the building and the door is open. Somebody will say, well, an honest mistake, big deal, no provocation. And within seconds, chandeliers were smashed on people's heads, and the only time the police was officially asked inside to maintain law and order was in that. So it's not something that doesn't happen today as well. Yes, there's no killing. But still, everybody knows exactly who owns what, who can do what, where, for how long, and if you violate one of these little articles over there, it's an international incident. And who tries to oversee everything? The Jewish state. You don't understand the potential here of problems, huh? Because the whole world is watching how the Jewish state tries to maintain law and order among Christian countries and Christian groups. Because when the Greek Orthodox are humiliated, it's a Russian issue. When the Catholics are, it's France and Italy. So everything that happens in Jerusalem is reflecting immediately on international affairs, especially Israel vis-a-vis those countries who are friends. So you do have to deal with the Muslims, deal with the Christians. The whole world is watching what the decisions you are making. Are you favoring somebody? Let me tell you a secret. If you make a decision to make everybody upset, that's the best decision you can make. You cannot satisfy one need. You have to make decisions to make everybody upset. And then you know you made a good decision. I kid you not, that's how it works. All right, let's see.
Standing outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the holiest place for many Christians on the planet. It is a place where many Christians believe that the crucifixion took place. That's where the tomb was at, and of course the place for the resurrection as well. In Greek, the church is called Anastasis, which means the resurrection. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre means the Church of the Holy Grave. This will be also the end of the Way of the Cross, of the Via Dolorosa, and some of the stations that people are marking today, 5 of them basically, are inside the building. It will be hard today, 2,000 years later, to understand how the terrain looked like and where would we be in relation to the city walls if that was indeed 20 centuries ago. Today we're inside the city walls, and that leads to some confusion because we know one thing beyond any doubt: it's impossible that Joseph of Arimathea had a tomb inside the city walls. Jewish cemeteries are located outside the residential area, and therefore we must be standing someplace outside the city walls. And therefore we need to imagine that there's no busy city around us, but just the main road that connects Jerusalem with the coast and the city of Jaffa, and 3 crosses on a hill, which is inside the building today. So this will be a challenge to try to visualize today how places used to look like 3,000 years ago. Here's what we know, part history and part, we have to say, traditions and legends. It was 327 AD when Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, was sent over from Rome, and she was on a mission to try to locate as many places she could in Jerusalem and other parts of Palestine and connect them with the scriptures. And now the legend says that she came to this area and the local tour guide showed her pieces of the wood, and she came to the conclusion that these are pieces of the true cross. And after she invited 2 or 3 people that were mortally wounded and sick, and once they touched the wood they were miraculously healed, she came to the conclusion that that must be the place. 2 churches were built. One was marking the place of the crucifixion, or Mount Golgotha, and the other one the tomb. So if you came to visit the place where the 2 churches were dedicated in the days of Constantine, 335 AD, you would be staring at 2 separated buildings, one adjacent to the other. What you see behind me now is the facade of the church built by the Crusaders. It was dedicated the 15th of July 1149, marking the 50th anniversary of the conquest of Jerusalem by the Crusaders. Today it's only one building, and the 2 centers, Hill of Golgotha on one side and the tomb itself are under one roof. So going inside is quite a lot to see, and we're going to point at some key locations inside the building.
No, we're not going to point at key locations inside the building. Just want to give you a flavor, a little bit of a taste. What are the streets of Jerusalem like as you're walking through the bazaars? And keep in mind, this is a quiet city, all right? Usually it's very busy. Some of you have been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There was nobody there. The plaza was totally, it never happens. So just to get an idea. The Muslims are calling for prayer. The church bells are ringing. The Jews keep very quiet when they go to pray. Each one has his own part of the city.
כל פעם שיהיה בשיר לעשות משהו, הוא מתקשר אליך.
Not a single level place in the city. It's all mountainous, up and down, always up and down. There's nobody in the streets. Amazing. I'm sorry. Five times a day. They call to prayer. They start at 5 o'clock in the morning. And if your hotel happens to be by a mosque, you get a wake-up call long before the phone rings. Which happens sometimes. Depends how much we like the group. Has to be my twin brother, not me. Okay, just to give you an idea about walking the bazaars in the streets of Jerusalem. You see ultra-Orthodox Jewish men, you see the monks, you see the priests from every denomination, every group, every country in the world. And somehow we all coexist, not without problems, always problems and tension, but all things considered, things are relatively quiet in Jerusalem. Okay, I wrote about the Jewish quarter.
This is the central plaza
just to
of the Jewish
show you the
quarter.
Jewish quarter just for a minute without really saying much. But in 1948-49, Israel was engaged in what we call the War of Independence, and the losing side called the disaster. I kid you not, that's the description to what happened in 1948. Jerusalem was the very heart of the battles in the country, and the old city and the Jewish quarter included. And we lost. We simply failed to liberate the Jewish quarter, and for 19 years the city was divided between Jordan on one side and Israel on the other side. What you see in front of you is the renovated Jewish quarter. The area was in a big kind of a pile of rubble, and what was still standing after the war was over, the Jordanians leveled on purpose, proclaiming very clearly, Jews will never rebuild or will never relive in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. Well, they were wrong, and we are back. And in 1967, before rebuilding the Jewish quarter, an opportunity to excavate. That was the only place in town that nobody lived there. So before they started rebuilding it, they just cleared everything, and that's how the excavation started in 1968. So today, you go through the Jewish quarter, you see sections from the wall of Hezekiah, for example, and you see bits and pieces from the city's history. And if you go downstairs in places, some amazing museums, basically living quarters from the days of Jesus, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the whole town is down there. You cannot take pictures. They won't let you take pictures. You need to come to the city and see that for yourself. The last place for today will be Zion Gates. You see the blue arrow over there. So we're walking through the old city of Jerusalem, coming from the Mount of Olives. And I think that you're happy that this is a virtual tour, because coming from the Mount of Olives, going down to the Kidron Valley, climb up to the other side, boy, that's a real effort that not everybody is capable of doing, but we did it on a virtual tour.
Walking out through Zion Gate on top of Mount Zion. This gate is connecting the Jewish quarter for one side and the area of the upper room on the other side. The term Zion is a little confusing. We need to clarify the term. When the Bible speaks about Mount Zion, it always refers to Mount Moriah. 19 times the Bible mentions the term Mount Zion, and it's always Mount Moriah. When you go to Psalm chapter 48, the Bible says that Mount Zion is on the side of the north of the city of David. Indeed, it is topographically. But in the 5th century, a church was built on top of this hill, and they called it St. Zion. The name simply shifted. So when today people speak about Mount Zion, and you see the name in maps of Jerusalem, it's not the biblical Mount Zion, which is Mount Moriah, but the western hill of Jerusalem, that Josephus Flavius calls the upper city or the western hill. For the last 1,500 years, this mountain is known by the name of Mount Zion. When you look at the gate behind me, you see a lot of holes. Looks like this area was severely damaged. Indeed, these are bullet marks that reminds us of the heavy fighting that took place in this area in the War of Israel's Independence, 1948-49. This was one of the heaviest battles in the city, and we had failed to liberate the old city of Jerusalem, not even the Jewish quarter.
And for that reason, for 19 years, where I'm standing was a buffer zone between two countries. The old city walls were in Jordanian hands, and this part of town was in Israeli hands, and that will be the border between the two parts of the city until the old city was liberated by the Israeli army in June 7th of 1967.
Walking out to the upper room, and that will be the last stop for today, the Cenacle. The Christian world is celebrating two major events in that location, which is a traditional location, we must say. We do not know if this is indeed the place, and the Bible doesn't tell us that 50 days after having the Last Supper, they met in the same place. The Bible says that for the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, they were in a place. The assumption is that the upper room became to be a place of gathering for the local disciples, so naturally they will be in the same location. But this is a connection that we are making, which is not really biblical. We speak about traditions. And the upper room is just outside. It was inside the walls of the city back then, outside the 16th century wall. And that's how it looks like. It's 13th century, no doubt. It's Crusader in style. They call that Neo-Romanesque, and you find that in many places in Europe as well. What's interesting is that you see on the side wall something that looks like a mosque. You see that alcove over there? Well, what was it? Well, Jesus is considered to be a prophet by the Muslims as well, Nabi Isa. And some places which are commemorating events from the New Testament, the Muslims will also adhere to, because for them, Jesus believed to be one of the prophets. So this place changed hands between the Muslims and the Christians. All depends who had the upper hand in the city. And the same building down below, here is David's tomb. Well, I have to say, no way that could be David's tomb. All right? It's not. The Bible tells us clearly David was buried in the city of David. The city of David is the other hill. All right? The southern slope of Mount Moriah. This is not the city of David. And the Bible also tells us that when Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, every family was erecting a section for 52 days. One family built the wall opposite to David's tomb. And therefore, this could not be the tomb of David. Again, it's a tradition. Interesting to note, in the same building, right up above will be the Christian side, and down below is the Jewish synagogue, basically. And the interesting connection is that in Jewish tradition, David's birthday and dying day was Pentecost. All right? We call it the Feast of Weeks, 7 weeks after Passover. Jews celebrating the Feast of Weeks, all right? Pentecost will be the kind of the same, the equivalent of the Feast of Weeks. An interesting connection between David's birthday and David's dying day, tradition, all right? The Bible says nothing about that, to be celebrated in the same building, but the Christian world is commemorating Pentecost. That will be the end of day number 1, in Jerusalem, I mean. And we have 2 more days in the city. The next day is going to be really important. We are going to go to the city of David. We'll go to the Western Wall. We'll see the excavations outside the Western Wall. We'll go to Temple Mount and say a few words about how on earth the Temple Mount is the 3rd holiest place to Islam, when the name Jerusalem is not even mentioned once in the Quran. We need to know that. Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran. But the question is, what makes the connection of the Muslim faith and Jerusalem? We'll address all of those fascinating issues in the next hour. 3 o'clock, please be seated. 10 past. Are you still with me? Are you okay? All right. I'm kind of scanning. I didn't see too many eyes closed. I may close my eyes because I'm really tired. But okay, that's really a good sign. So please be seated in about 10 minutes, and then we can carry on.